Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take complex source material, tear it apart, and hand you the synthesized knowledge you need.
Today, we are diving deep into what is, I think it's safe to say, one of the most complicated, fast-moving, and privacy-challenging areas of modern investigation.
We're talking about mobile device forensics.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
When you look at the entire landscape of digital forensics, I mean, mobile devices really do present a unique set of challenges.
How so? They're just small computers, right?
Well, yes and no.
Hmm.
They are miniature computers, sure, with constantly evolving operating systems, but they're also radio transceivers.
Okay.
And that means they're governed by a completely different set of legal and technical rules than, say, your desktop PC.
So our mission today is to cut through all that complexity. We're going to walk through the technical evolution, the very strict investigative procedures required for extraction, and then get into some of the landmark legal battles that are, constantly reshaping what investigators can and cannot do. Okay, let's unpack this right away with a case that truly shows how profound this kind of digital evidence can be. We're going to start with the 2014 case involving Conrad Roy and Michelle Carter.
A really tragic case.
It is. And what's so forensically important is that this wasn't a crime where police were looking for fingerprints or a physical weapon. The critical evidence, all of it, it consisted entirely of a series of text messages.
And those texts acted as the most objective witness imaginable.
Right.
It's a tragic and groundbreaking case that really redefined the idea of digital culpability. Conrad Roy died by suicide from carbon monoxide poisoning in his truck. And what led to Michelle Carter's conviction was the digital correspondence between them.
She was his long-distance girlfriend.
Right. And the evidence timeline was incredibly narrow. It was confined to about 1 week, from July 6 to July 12, 2014. But within those texts, the prosecution found everything they needed to establish intent and causality.
The phone was literally the crime scene. And Carter, she went so far beyond just knowing about Roy's distress.
So much further.
The text showed she actively coached him. She devised the carbon monoxide poisoning plan, and most critically, when Roy had a moment of, clarity and fear, he actually got out of the truck.
And she told him to get back in.
She directed him back inside. These weren't just passive exchanges, they were active instructions.
Exactly. The texts were terrifyingly specific. Roy texted her about his hesitation, saying things like he was not following through.
And her replies?
They were just incredibly manipulative. She used his own fear against him. She wrote, and this is a direct quote, "You're so hesitant because you keeping overthinking it and keep pushing it off. You just need to do it, Conrad. The more you push it off, the more it will eat at you."
Wow. She even promised him he would be free and happy.
She did. She used this really powerful emotional leverage, telling him he was strong enough and that he would go straight to heaven guided by God.
And when he worried about his family's grief, what did you say?
She just dismissed it, said, "People who commit suicide don't think this much. They just could do it." It was this constant back and forth. It wasn't just idle conversation. It was a real-time log of the victim's psychological state and her direct influence over him.
And here's the part that really seals it from a forensic perspective, the moment that highlights her own awareness, her own knowledge that these texts were damning evidence.
The smoking gun.
Right after he committed to the plan, she sent him one single explosive text. A question.
Did you delete the messages?
Exactly. And that one question proves it. It proves that mobile device data, specifically these SMS messages, is powerful enough to not only establish a timeline of events, but to document the specific causal chain and the intent behind those events.
The phone becomes a completely objective, time-stamped log of every single decision and every communication. It's the perfect witness.
So, if that digital trail is so critical to justice, we have to understand the technology that creates it and, of course, the challenges in accessing it. Let's start with just how complex this field is. We've said that mobile device forensics is arguably the most complicated area of digital forensics. Why is that?
It's true for, I'd say, 4 main reasons that kind of create a perfect storm for investigators.
Okay, what's the first?
First, just the sheer volume. The number of active mobile devices is enormous, and it's constantly growing. We're talking billions worldwide.
That's second.
Second, and this is maybe the most critical point, there's overwhelming inconsistency. Devices from different manufacturers, or even different generations from the same manufacturer, they often have very little in common structurally.
Which immediately complicates the tools you need for analysis.
Completely.
Right.
And third, they are proliferating so rapidly as substitutes for full-size computers. I mean, think about it. How many people primarily access the internet, their email, social media, only through their phone or tablet?
Most people, probably.
Right. So the vast majority of relevant digital evidence is now sequestered on these small devices.
And the fourth challenge.
The fourth is what I'd call architectural chaos. It's the hybrid nature of the device itself. A mobile phone is an amalgam of radio technology and computing technology.
So it's two things at once.
Exactly. And legally, the frameworks that cover a radio transceiver, things like spectrum usage, carrier regulation, are entirely different from the laws that govern a computer, which usually involve privacy laws about stored data. An investigator has to navigate both of those legal worlds at the same time.
To really understand the chaos of the present, I think we need to trace the history a bit. The historical evolution of mobile communication, starting with the very primitive analog origins, or 1G.
Right, we're talking about technology that really traces its roots all the way back to World War II ship-to-shore radios and, early walkie-talkies.
Culminating in that iconic Motorola handheld phone in 1973, the brick.
The brick phone, yeah. 1G was entirely analog. The signals were transmitted just like an older radio station.
Yeah.
The mobile device itself was just a very primitive computer paired with one or more radios.
And forensically, what could you get off those?
Not much. They were pretty simple. Data was limited to, basic phone directories, small call logs. The recovery challenge for old cold cases involving 1G is just immense because there's no sophisticated operating system to analyze.
Then the massive shift came with digital networks, 2G, which appeared in the 1990s. This is where things start getting more familiar.
Yeah, this introduced two competing standards.
All right.
There was GSM, or Global System for Mobile Communications.
Which became dominant pretty much everywhere else in the world.
Right. And then there was CDMA, Code Division Multiple Access, which was favored by some U.S. carriers.
And this digital shift gave us the feature phone.
Exactly. It shrank the hardware and gave us those smaller handheld feature phones.
Yeah.
And these devices enabled the beginning of practical data communications. We got SMS text messages and basic email synchronization.
But it was slow.
Very slow. You could transmit data, but it wasn't a true interactive internet experience. The data was still mostly circuit switched.
Okay, what does that mean, circuit switched?
It means a dedicated line or circuit had to be established for the whole duration of the communication. Think of it like an old landline phone call. When you dial, the network creates a direct physical connection between you and the other person. That line is yours until you hang up.
Got it. So the real fundamental architectural change came with mobile broadband, or 3G, which started in Japan in 2001. This is where forensics gets truly complex.
Because the system moved away from that circuit-switched model.
The dedicated line.
Right. It moved to packet-switched systems, which behave exactly like the internet.
So what's the analogy for packet switched?
The analogy here is crucial. Think of circuit-switched 2G, like a dedicated pipeline you reserve for an hour. Once that connection is made, no one else can use that pipe, and data flows continuously, even if you stop talking. Packet-switched, which is 3G and 4G, is like writing your message on thousands of tiny little postcards, or packets. Each one of those packets finds its own fastest route to the recipient, and it shares the infrastructure with everyone else's postcards.
That makes sense. And what was the forensic implication of that shift?
The move to packet switching facilitated easy, constant internet connection. This was the birth of the modern smartphone as we know it.
So now transferring photos, streaming video, video chat, all that became possible.
Exactly. And the devices started keeping massive, detailed logs of all that internet activity, which transformed them into primary sources of forensic data.
And 4G networks, which are native IP, they just completed that transition.
They did. They accessed the internet directly using IP addresses, which drastically increased the speed and bandwidth. At this stage, 4G devices are essentially just mobile nodes on the internet. They're fully capable of substituting for a desktop PC for almost any digital task.
And to really appreciate how all this works, we should probably visualize the underlying cellular system concept. I mean, we see cell towers everywhere.
It's a vast network of relatively short-distance transceivers, the cell towers, that are spaced strategically across a coverage area.
And the coverage areas are called cells, hence cell phone.
Precisely. And if you could overlay that coverage on a map, you would see that the antenna arrays on the towers produce these hexagonal transmitting patterns.
Why hexagonal?
That design is critical. It's the most efficient way to tile a surface without gaps, and it enables two vital concepts. First is handoff.
Right, so you don't drop your call when you're driving down the highway.
Exactly. Handoff allows a user to move between these coverage areas, or cells, without dropping the call. The network architecture is designed to smoothly transfer your connection from one tower to the next as you travel.
And the second concept.
The second is frequency reuse. Because the cell coverage areas are relatively small and the transmitting patterns are hexagonal, nearby towers can reuse the same frequency channels without interfering with each other.
So it's like a stadium where you can have a seat 12 in section A and another seat 12 in section Z.
That's a perfect analogy. You can reuse the same seat number, the frequency, in different far-separated sections, the cells, without confusing people. And this allows the carrier to handle a massive number of simultaneous users across a wide geographic area.
So that technical progression laid the foundation for everything we have today, but it also, as you said, created a forensic headache. Let's talk about how the age and sophistication of a device really affects the evidence recovery process, starting with those oldest systems.
Right, so dealing with a 1G device today is extremely rare. I mean, you'd only see it in a very old cold case, but they are instructive.
Because they're so simple.
Because they're so simple. The lack of an operating system means there's no formal structure, no file allocation table. Data is limited to those primitive directories. And the critical forensic challenge is that if material was deleted,
It's just gone.
it's just gone. It is typically unrecoverable because there's no underlying structure, like a file system, to hold on to those residual data fragments for later analysis.
Okay, so then 2G devices offered a bit more capability. They often ran custom OSs, sort of the ancestors of today's mobile operating systems.
They did. But while they had more functionality, they still present this huge challenge. High variability. The recoverability of deleted data changes drastically from model to model, based entirely on how that specific proprietary OS managed its memory.
And that leads us, I think, directly to what you called the single most difficult issue in mobile device forensics, something that frustrates examiners every day.
The standardization nightmare.
Right.
The sheer proliferation of models, I mean, hundreds of manufacturers producing thousands of different devices, makes it nearly impossible for forensic laboratories to stay current.
What's the practical implication of that? I mean, what does that look like for an examiner on a Tuesday morning?
It's profound. It means you could have two phones from the exact same brand manufactured just months apart that look identical on the outside.
But on the inside.
They could have different internal components, different firmware, different storage mechanisms. An industry-standard forensic tool, like a Celebrate machine, might require a specific custom driver set for phone A, but without that exact driver, it's completely locked out of phone B.
So labs must be spending a fortune just on research and tools?
Massive amounts of resources on research and reverse engineering just to keep pace with the market. Whereas in PC forensics, the core architecture, Windows, Mac, Linux file systems, has remained relatively consistent for decades.
Okay, so let's move to modern 3G and 4G devices, smartphones and tablets. They certainly share the architecture of a PC with sophisticated processors and file systems.
They do.
But they still have key differences that complicate the extraction process.
Absolutely. We're talking about size restrictions, for one,
Hmm?
and also the fact that they have multiple radios, Wi-Fi, 4G, Bluetooth, NFC, all running at once. And their memory is managed differently. It's optimized for quick use, for battery life, not necessarily for data persistence.
And that ties right into the app factor.
Oh yeah, applications are both a blessing and a curse for forensics.
A blessing because they're a goldmine of data.
An incredible goldmine. They store huge amounts of user activity messages, location logs, purchases, you name it. But every single app is a universe unto itself.
How so?
How they store data, where they store it, how they communicate externally, it's all wildly inconsistent, especially for Android apps.
I've heard that Apple's a bit more standardized.
It is. Apple has imposed more standardization on its iOS apps, which makes forensic analysis somewhat easier. But with Android, the examiner frequently has to reverse engineer the data structures just to figure out what the app is doing and how it writes information to the storage. It's an exercise in constant technical adaptation.
Another massive area is geolocation. This is huge for investigators.
Invaluable. Geolocation is the assessment of a mobile device's actual geographical location, and it's an incredibly valuable piece of evidence for tracking a person's movements.
And this isn't just the GPS, right?
No, it's a combination of things. It's a GPS, which is assisted GPS that uses the cellular network to get a faster lock. It's Wi-Fi triangulation. It's cell tower data. The phone uses all of these to pinpoint its location.
And if we were looking at a forensic report right now, what would we see?
You'd see a visual representation, a map, with pins showing different device locations plotted over time. This data can place a suspect at a specific crime scene or trace their movements leading up to or following an event. It's incredibly powerful.
And we have to remember, forensics applies not just to smartphones, but also to dedicated GPS devices, like a Garmin or a TomTom.
Yes, but again, those require specialized tools and drivers, often proprietary ones, to extract the location history and waypoints. It just adds to the ever-growing library of required forensic knowledge for any lab.
And speaking of custom requirements, there's the underlying hardware complexity, specifically the chipset.
The chipset, this is the integrated circuit, it's the engine that runs the device, and it introduces another major variable that can sabotage an investigation before it even begins.
When does this become a critical issue?
It's especially critical when investigators encounter non-standard devices or, knockoffs, especially those using chips manufactured in parts of Asia that may not adhere to typical American or European component standards.
So they don't play well with the standard forensic tools.
Not at all. These non-standard chips often require analysts to acquire unique driver sets just to correctly communicate with the memory for extraction. Otherwise, the data is essentially hidden in a format the tool can't understand.
Okay, finally in this section, let's talk about storage architecture.
Right. Device storage comes in multiple forms. You have the onboard non-volatile memory, that's the permanent storage inside the device, like the hard drive of a PC.
And then you have the plug-in SD cards.
Exactly. The plug-in SD or secure digital cards. These are storage expansion cards, mostly used for media like photos and music. Both are non-volatile, which means the data persists when the power is off.
But the access is different.
Very different. Older devices, especially those old feature phones, often require highly specialized proprietary connectors and drivers just to access that internal memory. And you go to all that trouble, and they yield far less information because of their limited data capacity compared to, modern multi-gigabyte storage arrays.
Okay, so given all of these technological hurdles, investigators have to follow extremely strict, meticulous procedures to make sure evidence is preserved and extracted correctly. Let's start with the first step right after they seize a device, pre-acquisition preparation.
This whole phase is about two things: intelligence gathering and protection.
So first, intelligence.
First, the investigator has to determine the precise device type. Is it an old feature phone, a specific model of iPhone, a cutting-edge Android? This requires web searching, checking databases for known recovery techniques. If the analyst just tries to do an extraction without knowing the specific model requirements,
They could destroy the evidence.
they risk corrupting or even completely wiping the evidence.
And the second part is protection, which is paramount.
Paramount. Every single mobile device, regardless of whether it's on or off, must immediately be stored in a Faraday bag or box.
Okay, what is that and why is it so mandatory?
A Faraday bag is a metallic enclosure that basically prevents radio frequency signals from reaching the device. It's a signal blocker. And it's mandatory because it prevents any remote changes.
You have to remote wipe.
Exactly. The owner might try to send a remote wipe command to destroy the evidence, or even unintentionally, the carrier network could push a software update or a text message that might overwrite volatile memory or critical log files.
So the Faraday bag freezes the device in its current state.
It ensures that the digital evidence is frozen in time until a forensic image can be acquired.
This leads us to the core technical distinction in evidence recovery: logical versus physical extraction. This is really where the depth of the forensic dive is determined.
It is. And physical extraction is the gold standard. It's the holy grail of mobile forensics.
And what is it, exactly?
It is a bit-by-bit copy of the entire memory chip. And because it copies everything, not just the file the operating system recognizes, it is the only method that includes deleted data, or fragments of files that still reside on the physical memory. If the device supports it, this is the mandatory route.
Okay, and the less desirable alternative?
That would be logical extraction. You can think of this as just the user's view of the phone. It's simply a snapshot of the active file system. It shows only the data the operating system wants the user to see.
So active files, current phone books, recent texts.
Right. But it does not typically recover deleted data. It's really only useful when a physical extraction is technologically impossible, maybe due to the proprietary nature of the hardware or heavy encryption.
So when the extraction begins, examiners use these forensic imagers we've mentioned, like Celebrate's UFID touch or Parabin's device seizure.
Right. And a critical best practice is to run the imager twice.
Why?
You create two identical images. One image is labeled the evidence original. It gets archived. You write protect it. You never touch it again. And the second image is the working image, which is used for all the analysis. This just safeguards the original evidence against any kind of inadvertent damage during the complex analysis phase.
And what about the timing of these processes? Are they quick?
Well, logical images are pretty fast. They just grab the active files.
Yeah.
But physical images, they can take hours, even if the storage isn't full,
Why so long?
because the tool has to look at and copy the entire memory footprint of the device. It has to check every single sector, every bit and byte for residual data. Often examiners will run a logical extraction first just to get a quick look at the recent active evidence, while the hours-long physical extraction runs in the background.
And as you said, the industry relies heavily on these commercial tools to simplify things.
Oh, absolutely. The UFED Touch, MPE Plus, Device Seizure, Oxygen. These are standard names. And these tools don't just extract the data, they interpret the proprietary file systems and display all the artifacts in a human-readable, reportable format. They do the heavy lifting.
Now, here's where the physical world meets the digital in a really surprising way. Let's talk about the analysis of submerged devices.
Right.
We have a fascinating study here from VTO Labs that directly addressed the resilience of digital evidence against physical destruction.
Yeah, this is a great study because conventional wisdom often tells investigators to just dismiss devices that are heavily damaged, especially water damage. They look like a lost cause.
So VTO Labs decided to test that assumption.
They did. They took 49 identical phones and submerged them for a full 7 days in a variety of corrosive and destructive liquids. We're talking oil-based liquids, flammable fuels, and even harsh chemicals like drain cleaner.
And the finding was a huge takeaway for investigators.
A tremendous takeaway. The digital evidence is astonishingly resilient. In all of the trials, a full forensic image was successfully extracted. The size of that extracted image, 3,909,091,328 bytes, was the exact amount that was imaged before submersion.
So there was no data loss.
No data loss, despite severe visible corrosion. This resilience often shifts the burden of proof. It requires labs to at least attempt an extraction, regardless of how bad the device looks on the outside.
What for the devices that were most severely corroded, like the ones in drain cleaner?
For those, the data couldn't be accessed traditionally through the ports, so the difficult and costly chip-off technique was required.
And what does that involve?
It involves physically desoldering and removing the memory chips from the circuit board. Then you have to clean them, repair any damaged connections, and then connect them directly to a special forensic reader to bypass the device's main processor and firmware.
That sounds invasive, expensive, and very time-consuming.
It is all of those things. But the payoff can be immense. You can recover data that would otherwise be completely lost.
And the study had another surprising finding about what's most damaging.
It did. It turns out that salt water was actually more damaging to the components than gasoline or drain cleaner. And other studies have shown that data was successfully recovered from phones that were submerged in fresh water for up to 3 years.
The lesson is never assume evidence is destroyed just because the device looks compromised.
Never.
Finally, we should briefly touch on safety and physical handling. When you're dealing with damaged phones, especially if you have to disassemble it for a chip-off,
You must use specialized tools. And you have to be acutely aware of static electricity dangers, ESD, or electrostatic discharge.
especially on carpeted surfaces.
Absolutely. A simple static discharge from your body, one you wouldn't even feel, could permanently damage those delicate memory chips and render the evidence useless. So, using a grounded anti-static wristband doing any physical handling is an absolute must. It safeguards the integrity of that crucial evidence within.
Okay, let's turn to the device's internal components and how their design dictates what an investigator can and cannot access. The architecture, you said, defines the device's fundamental components.
Right, the architecture is just the integration of several core elements. You've got the digital signal processor and the microprocessor, those are the brains. You've got the radio components, the transmitter and receiver, audio components, and the power supply that manages the battery and charging.
And it's that combination, a simple radio transceiver with digital processing, that makes it a hybrid device.
Exactly. And as we mentioned earlier, that hybrid construction mandates a hybrid legal focus. The investigator has to focus on laws covering the computer-side data privacy, content storage, and laws covering the radio transceiver side, which has jurisdictional variations on how signal interception is treated.
Okay, now we need to clearly define the two primary forms of removable storage, SIMs and SD cards. They can look similar, but their functions are fundamentally different.
And that difference is vital to forensic analysis.
So let's start with the simple one, the SD card.
The SD, or Secure Digital Card, is just a storage expansion card. It's simple, non-volatile memory that's typically used for media photos, videos, music. If
Mm.
you were holding one, you'd see it's a tiny thumbnail-sized card that fits into an adapter for reading. Forensically, you just treat it like a small hard drive or a USB stick.
And then there's the SIM card, subscriber identification module.
Right. The SIM card is the device's network ID card. It's what identifies the user account to the network and handles authentication.
So it stores subscriber information, the phone book.
Right. The phone book, maybe some older text messages on older cards, and network details. It's what tells AT&T or Verizon this device belongs to account X.
And every SIM has two unique identifiers.
It does. First is the IMSI, which is the International Mobile Subscriber Identity Number. That links the phone to the subscriber service provider.
And second.
Second is the ICCID, the Integrated Circuit Card Identifier. That's the number that's physically printed on the SIM card itself. It's a complex number that contains the issuer identification number, the individual account identification, and check digit.
And the forensic utility here is just unambiguous identification.
That's right. The tool extracts the ICCID to identify the specific SIM card that was in the phone at the time of seizure. But, and this is a critical contextual difference, the examiner must always remember they are seeing the SIM identity. Meaning people swap SIM cards between phones all the time. A timeline of calls or texts you derive from the SIM card may not correspond to the physical device it was found in. That's a major point of potential confusion that the examiner absolutely has to reconcile.
So for evidentiary preservation, it's often necessary to clone the SIM.
Yes, this is very similar to taking a physical image of a hard drive. Forensic vendors provide specialized forensic SIMs, like those from Access Data, that act as a target for cloning the evidence SIM. This preserves the original data and prevents any potential network overwrites while you're examining it.
Okay, moving inside the device itself, the structure of the file systems determines data recoverability.
Completely. Primitive devices, the ones lacking a formal OS, might use a simple flat file database.
What's that?
It's basically a single, unstructured, human-readable file. It's used for basic data like phone books. There's no complex organization.
But modern devices use a formal file system.
Yes, a sophisticated software mechanism that tracks the logical location of files and links them to their physical location on the storage. And this is usually done via a structured database. Often it's a standard open source one like SQLite or SQLite.
And what is SQLite used for?
It's used to manage almost everything. Call logs, text messages, contacts, app data. It's a forensic goldmine.
So the analysis tool must know the device's specific file system structure to pull that data out correctly.
It has to. And the recoverability of deleted files varies drastically depending on which system is being used. iOS uses HSSX. Android primarily uses XT4 or YAFFS. Older Blackberries used SQLite or MSXFAT.
And those differences really matter in practice.
Oh, they matter a lot. For instance, recovering deleted items like emails or texts from older Blackberries was notoriously difficult. It often required the examiner to go find a PC backup or get the data from the corporate BlackBerry server because the device itself just offered very poor data persistence.
But with modern iOS and Android?
Recovery of deleted files from iOS with its HFSX file system and Android with XT4, both of which use modern, often journaled, file systems, is generally much easier with physical extraction tools like UFED. The system just retains more metadata about those deleted files, which the tools can use to piece them back together.
So now that we've secured the phone and understood the data structures, we need to focus on what the data actually tells us. We need to find the valuable forensic artifacts.
Right, and given the impossibility of covering all 50,000 to 100,000 device types out there, we have to focus on key examples of what we can find.
So let's start with a feature phone example, something like the Samsung SEH R350 from around 2009.
A classic feature phone. It ran the EFS, or encrypting file system. Analysis using a tool's project tree extraction, which is basically its user interface, could reveal some basic artifacts. Things like web browsing history, the phone book, and calendar entries. This is generally the minimum useful information you'd hope to get.
Okay, now let's contrast that with a smartphone example. Let's say an older iPhone 4S.
A completely different world. It provides what the text calls a veritable treasure trove of data. Because the device is an internet node, the specific artifacts are vastly more numerous and rich.
And the list is extensive.
It is. You have detailed call logs, chats, which can often include deleted messages if you got a good physical extraction contacts, including recently contacted lists, cookies, which are crucial for establishing web context, SMS texts, and voicemails.
And the tools can organize all this.
They do. They can organize this massive data set analyzing activity by caller, showing you all the incoming, outgoing, missed calls and texts in one single chronological view. It's incredibly powerful for building a narrative.
And this is where the timing really comes in, especially with dedicated location devices. Let's talk about GPS artifacts from something like a Garmin Nuvi 40.
Right. A dedicated GPS device generates a timeline that is directly associated with specific latitude and longitude coordinates, and it's accurate down to just a few meters.
So this allows examiners to track the device's progress on a map.
Exactly. They can list specific journeys with turn-by-turn waypoints, and critically, they can identify favorite destinations. These are often key locations relevant to an investigation, like a drug meeting spot or a victim's regular route home from work.
And to manage and interpret this just overwhelming amount of data, the forensic tools generate analytic aids that sort and interpret the information graphically.
Because a raw data dump is useless to a jury. The visualization is what provides the intelligence.
For instance, a network map graphic, which we might call figure 20 to 5 in a textbook, visually represents communications between subjects and devices.
This is essential for visualizing conspiracy cases. It shows you who talked to whom, when they talked, and the volume of that communication, all in one easy-to-understand chart.
Another crucial visualization, maybe a figure 20 to 6, would show geotagged locations of images.
Yes, when you take a photo with a smartphone, the GPS coordinates are often embedded in the file's metadata. The forensic tool extracts this data and places pins on a map, showing precisely where key photos were taken. That is irrefutable placement evidence.
Then we'd also rely on something like a figure 20 to 7, which is mapping analysis from cell tower information.
This describes the geographic area divided into those cells we discussed earlier. It provides the general location of device usage by showing which towers the phone connected to. Now, it's less precise than GPS, but it can still place a suspect within a specific geographical footprint at a specific time.
And finally, a figure 20 to 8 would be the classic timeline graph.
The layered chart. It plots all the device activities, texts, calls, app usage, location changes, across one continuous time period. And this provides the foundation for building what we call the hybrid crime assessment.
Which brings us to our next section. Tying everything together is this process. Hybrid crime assessment. This is where we integrate all that digital evidence with the physical investigation.
A hybrid crime assessment is a necessary technique. It's designed to tie a physical crime, let's say a murder or a robbery, with all of its digital elements, the computers and mobile devices involved, into one single cohesive crime scene narrative.
So the digital devices provide an excellent yardstick, as the text says, for measuring the precise time and order of events.
Exactly. The pre-crime phase, the peri-crime, which is during the crime, and the post-crime phase.
So investigators then construct the chain of evidence. And we need to be very clear. This is different from the chain of custody.
Completely different. The chain of custody describes the access and handling of the physical evidence, who touched it, when, and why. The chain of evidence describes the events and evidence that actually make up the crime itself, and it comes in two forms.
What's the first form?
The first are temporal chains. These show events strictly in the order of time they occurred. This is the timeline. It's the easiest format for triers of fact, juries and laypeople, to visualize a complicated sequence of events.
And the second form?
The second are causal chains. These describe events in terms of cause and effect. They illustrate how one link in the evidence chain necessarily caused the next event to happen. For instance, how a specific text message, the cause, led to a physical meeting, the effect.
So while the causal chain is important for proving motive and intent, the temporal chain is often the most practical investigative starting point.
It is. You build the timeline first.
There's a compelling anecdote in the material that shows the power of this timeline accuracy.
Yeah, in one case, a victim's computer activity log placed the time of their murder from a shooting within a very tight 8-minute window. The log just showed the victim's regular online activities abruptly ending.
And that corroborated a witness account.
Perfectly. The computer acted as a precise, objective timer for the crime.
And a mobile device is particularly useful for this because it's synchronized to the network clock.
Yes. Carriers use highly accurate time standards, often linked to sources like the U.S. Naval Observatory. This means the phone's log is extremely accurate for measuring time, often down to the second.
And what's fascinating is that even the automatic activities, the housekeeping logs, provide precise time markers.
These are activities the phone performs automatically in the background. Things like maintaining contact with the network, running internal diagnostics, or even just toggling airplane mode. These automatic entries are all timestamped, and they provide an objective record of the phone's status throughout the entire investigation timeline.
Another incredibly powerful artifact is using Wi-Fi forensics as alibi replacement.
This is a great one. When a mobile device has its Wi-Fi turned on, it is constantly scanning for and logging all the Wi-Fi networks in its range, even if it doesn't connect to them.
How does it do that?
It sends out these silent probe requests, basically shouting into the void, "Is anyone out there?"
Mm.
And it logs all the networks that respond.
And that log entry is a forensic goldmine.
An absolute goldmine.
Mm.
For example, if the log shows that a device successfully joined the Best Buy network at 15.42.30 on a specific date, that log places the user at that specific retail location at that specific time.
So it can corroborate or contradict GPS data, witness interviews, or an alibi with a very high degree of precision.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move into the crucial legal scrutiny and privacy landscape. This is where the technology meets the law, and we have to start with the famous FBI versus Apple encryption dispute that followed the 2015 San Bernardino shooting.
A huge case. The iPhone 5C recovered from one of the shooters was locked with a simple 4-digit password, but the internal encryption prevented the FBI from just bypassing it.
So they couldn't just brute force the password.
No, because after a certain number of failed attempts, the phone would wipe itself. So the FBI sought a court order to force Apple to create a special version of the iOS operating system, essentially a security backdoor, that would allow investigators to attempt unlimited passwords without deleting the data.
And Apple said no.
Apple declined, citing customer privacy and their own security policy. They argued that creating such a tool would compromise the security of all their users globally, because if that tool ever leaked, it would be catastrophic.
So this standoff escalated into a huge high-stakes court battle.
It did. It really highlighted the core tension between national security, law enforcement access, and mandatory device encryption. Ultimately, the FBI withdrew their request after they found a third party who was able to unlock the phone for them. But the underlying conflict remains completely unresolved to this day.
That fight over government access brings us to the technology that law enforcement sometimes uses to track phones. Stingray technology, also known as an MSI catcher.
Right. A Stingray, which was originally designed by the Harris Corporation in 2013, is what's known as a cell site simulator.
And how does it work?
It operates by mimicking a legitimate cell tower. It puts out a very strong signal, and because mobile devices are designed to always connect to the strongest signal available, nearby phones connect to the Stingray instead of the actual carrier tower.
And once it's connected,
the Stingray can intercept mobile traffic, it can track a device's movements, or it can even be used to send fake texts.
it operates in two key modes.
It does. The active mode is the one that mimics the tower to force the connection, which allows for that data extraction and tracking. There's also a passive mode, which just listens to traffic. And the smaller, hand-carried version of this technology is known as Kingfish.
The use of Stingray is deeply controversial.
Very, because it indiscriminately collects data from all phones in the area, not just the target device. It sweeps up data from innocent people, which raises major privacy concerns.
And finally, we arrive at the monumental Supreme Court case that fundamentally altered how historical mobile device data is treated in the U.S. Carpenter versus United States.
A landmark case. The core issue was whether law enforcement needed a full search warrant, which has to be supported by probable cause, to obtain historical CSLI, that cell site location information, from third-party cell phone companies.
And before Carpenter, they didn't need a full warrant.
No. Before Carpenter, law enforcement used a much less stringent order for disclosure based on something called the third-party doctrine.
And what's that doctrine?
It's an old legal theory that basically stipulated that any information you voluntarily share with a third party, like a phone company or a bank, forfeits any reasonable expectation of privacy you might have had over it.
So under that old order, law enforcement only had to show specific and articulable facts that the information was relevant to an ongoing investigation.
Which is a much, much lower legal hurdle than probable cause. The government essentially argued that since the phone company logged the data for its own business purposes, the user had no privacy expectation over it.
But the Supreme Court, in a narrow 5-4 decision, rejected that argument for CSLI.
They did. The court recognized that cumulative historical location data, when you aggregate it over days and weeks, reveals a detailed, comprehensive picture of a person's movements, their associations, their private life patterns. They go far beyond the simple record-keeping function that the third-party doctrine was originally meant to cover.
So the ruling stated that obtaining these historical CSLI records without a warrant supported by probable cause violated the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches.
It was monumental. The implication is that government entities must now obtain a warrant based on that higher standard of probable cause to access historical cell phone location records for domestic criminal investigations. It effectively elevated this digital data to the same protected class as a physical search of your home or your personal effects.
What an immense amount of material to process. We began by really demonstrating the irrefutable power of digital evidence with the Michelle Carter case.
A powerful example.
Then we charted the chaotic landscape of mobile forensics, understanding that the complexity comes from the sheer device volume and that huge technological shift from analog 1G all the way to native IP4G networks.
And particularly that transition from circuit switching to packet switching, which enabled the modern smartphone.
Right. And we established the absolute standard in evidence collection, the physical extraction, that bit-by-bit copy that captures deleted data, versus the less comprehensive logical extraction.
We also noted that digital evidence is surprisingly resilient, as shown by that VTO Labs study on submerged phones, which often requires the intensive chip-off technique for data retrieval.
And we clarified those essential components. The distinction between the non-volatile SD card and the network-identifying SIM card, with its crucial MSI and ICCID numbers.
And finally, we mapped the legal landscape, noting how a hybrid crime assessment turns the device's network-synchronized clock into an extremely accurate timeline, even as landmark rulings like Carpenter v. United States are continually reshaping the rules of engagement for law enforcement,
forcing them to get a warrant based on probable cause for historical location data access.
This whole field is fundamentally defined by that constant rapid negotiation. I mean, the technology changes monthly, but the Fourth Amendment and the concept of personal privacy, they remain anchored. And this forces the legal system to constantly reevaluate how we treat data that is generated automatically, accurately, and constantly about all of us.
So what does this all mean for you, the individual carrying this device in your pocket right now? I think you have to consider the dual nature of your phone. It is your ultimate tool for communication and convenience, but
it's automated logging of location, behavior, and associations. From the precise time you checked your email this morning to every single Wi-Fi network your phone scanned as you walked down the street, makes it perhaps the single most powerful and objective witness available.
it forces us to ask, if your mobile device is the most accurate, continuous, and unbiased witness to your entire life,
What exactly does it know about your private movements and associations that you might have already forgotten?
thank you for joining us for this deep dive into mobile device forensics. We'll see you next time.